The panel started with a presentation by Dr. Michael Richards about tropical deforestation, causes and solutions. Due to technical difficulties, this recording begins in the middle of his talk.
The one soybean plantation surrounding a little island of forest. This is typical in parts of Amazonia. But if you like, the more important part of this, in a way, is the underlying or indirect causes. We talk, because I'm an economist, we talk about market and policy failure. Market failure is simply that there are no markets for ecosystem services. So therefore, there's no money coming back from these life-supporting services. And it also means that the people who deforest do not pay the costs of it. Society pays costs, basically, in terms of our welfare and our health. The second main area is basically bad policies and bad governance. And this is linked to, values, basically, dishonesty, greed, corruption, but also just bad policies, which make it very profitable and easy to cut down forests. Climate change, hugely important and becoming increasingly important every year. Fire, pests and diseases. Population and poverty pressure, demand for land and food. Next slide, please. So I said, in a way, I spend most of my life working on this page, shall we say. If you like, international society, through aid programs, through research and development, has been working on different ways of trying to tackle deforestation. Firstly, trying to create these markets that don't exist, through payments for reducing carbon emissions, making payments for the managers of forests and for forest conservation. But this has proved very controversial, very hard to measure, and very uncertain in terms of the permanence of the forests. Paying for the water, the hydrological services. This actually has been more successful, and some countries have had considerable success with this approach. Particularly in Mexico, the forests managed by the communities are still largely intact. Tackling policy and governance failure. Introducing import regulations to reduce illegal logging and the illegal timber trade. This, again, has proved very difficult and largely unsuccessful. There's a very important piece of legislation supposedly coming in this year or next year called the EU Deforestation Regulation, in which the main commodities causing deforestation have to be proven to be deforestation free in their supply chains. But that's easier said than done, I'm afraid. And support for land rights and the forest conservation of traditional forest peoples. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. Next one, please. Obviously, there's a whole raft of measures around tree planting, agroforestry, forest restoration. Some very important success stories around tree planting and agroforestry. We are currently in the UN decade of ecosystem restoration. The International Tree Foundation, of course, founded by Richard Baker, is very active in forest restoration, for example, in East Africa. This is a picture from Kenya. This, incidentally, is a Bahá'í-inspired education program in Honduras, where a lot of the so-called SAP groups have tree nurseries. Next slide, please. But there's been some fantastic work done around indigenous people's land rights. And this is, I sort of picked on this because this is where you see a very strong justice and ethical basis to the solutions. Something like 14% of primary forest and 40% of the Amazon forest is managed by indigenous peoples. And a UN study has shown that deforestation in the indigenous people managed areas was less than half of the non-indigenous people areas. I was fortunate to be involved with a program in Acre State, Brazil, with the Suri people, and we did a lot of training, as you can see. Unfortunately, when Mr. Bolsonaro came to power, the diagram, the picture you see on the top, where you see the dramatic, is obviously a satellite imagery, where you see the dramatic difference. Unfortunately, the Suri territory was basically overrun by loggers and ranchers, cattle ranchers. Next slide, please. So, again, on the same theme, I think that this approach brings out, one very important spiritual principle, which is shown in the so-called cosmovision belief systems of many of the Amerindian peoples, in which reciprocity with nature is absolutely fundamental. What you take away, you have to give back. Sarah, would you like to read a quote by Abdul Baha?
Cooperation and reciprocity are essential properties which are inherent in the unified system of the world of existence, and without which the entire creation will be reduced to nothingness.
Next slide, please. So one can see a spiritual perspective in many of the solutions to the problem of deforestation. Obviously, value-based solutions to counter materialism, greed, dishonesty, and promote ethical and justice-based solutions. World governance is obviously absolutely critical. The nationalistic and vested interests are very much behind the problem of policy and governance failure. And spiritual values, as we all know, are the basis of environmental stewardship.
Destabilization of the global climate system is in large measure a moral challenge, requiring humanity to develop a greater sense of stewardship and responsibility for the environment, as well as a greater awareness of the interdependence and oneness of all the Earth's inhabitants.
Well, that was a quotation from the Universal House of Justice. Let's stop this.
All right, thank you very much. I think it's a wonderful presentation. I think you have set the stage very well, speaking about the focus on social action discourse, and then nicely linking it with the ethical aspects behind it, and found very good quotes which support those words. So now, if I may, friends, I will introduce our next speaker, who is Monica Maghami. She is a lawyer and gender rights advocate. Monica bridges global regulatory law with ESG, championing equity across borders. She serves in boards and initiatives focused on systematic change and inclusion and sustainability. So her presentation will be on women and the environment. So Monica explores how environmental crises disproportionately affect women and highlights their unique, resilient approaches to climate solutions, advocating for inclusive, principle-based responses rooted in gender equality. So Monica, the floor is yours. Kristian Knoll is he leads interface climate initiatives at London School of Economics, is it? Yes. He chairs UNEP's Face for Earth Use Council and shapes youth climate advocacy globally, blending policy work with religious frameworks for environmental impact. So his presentation today will be on motivating transformative change that requires finding a new why. So Kristian will reflect on faith's power to inspire meaningful climate action, proposing religious narratives as tools to reshape policy discourse and engage diverse stakeholders in climate policy making. I hope that's the accurate representation of your presentation.
Well, I hope so too, and I'll do my best to be brief here. But thank you so much to IEF. Thank you to Monica and Christine for the kind invitation. I think basically the role that I play, as I want to describe it, is I try to convene different actors and bring in new ways of thinking about the climate crisis. I am someone who comes from the United States originally. I'm based at the London School of Economics. I'm not Bahá'í, I'm a Christian, but I do have a tremendous amount of respect for many of the principles that our two faiths have in common. And I'm also involved in environmental policy. That's my background. That was what I studied, and I had the privilege of working in both the German parliament and the parliament in the UK, advancing environmental policy. Now that sounds a bit more grandiose than it really was in practice, because this is a system of doing. It's a system of policymaking that is quite difficult to bring transformative change into, and that's really where I want to start in defining what transformative change can be. I've just come from London Climate Action Week. That was all of last week. There were over 700 events happening in London where stakeholders from around the world, tens of thousands of individuals from around the world came to London to discuss many different things as it relates to environmental governance, particularly in the lead up to the Conference of the Parties conference happening in Brazil in November, the COP30. The main theme, and I sort of jumped around to different events, as is my job title of Partnerships and Impact Coordinator, so that requires a lot of this event attending. But the main theme that I heard was that what we are doing now isn't quite good enough. It's enough that we need some sort of change. But in each of the different settings, that change was very different. For some people, it's, we need to transform the energy system. For other people, it's we need to transform our way of engaging with constituents. That's perhaps the one that I fall the most into. For others, it's we need to transform the way we relate to nature. And so finding a common point is this need to change, but finding a common point in terms of what that means is very difficult for different people. So when I talk about transformational change, I want to define that as I looked up the definition to help me guide this, and it is a marked change in form, nature, or appearance. But of course, that's going to depend on what industry you're in, what background you're coming from. That is not a universal thing. So I'm quite glad that the theme of this panel is motivating transformational change and not what does transformational change look like, because I wouldn't dare to prescribe what transformational change may look like in the various sectors that we're all representing. But I do think we can all motivate change. And so what I want to share briefly today is just some reflections from my work trying to do that in different spaces, and then some examples of how we've done our best to do that. I also, though, before I do that, want to draw attention to the main theme of this conference and fundamentally these discussions, and that is building capacity for sustainability discourse and action. And I think that's a fundamental step, because through discourse, through dialogue, through engaging with different stakeholders, through engaging across faiths, across sectors, across difference, is where we can not only identify where change is needed, but also identify where change is happening and identify synergies and ways to collaborate, which I think is really needed, especially in a time defined by a lot of bad news in the space. So what I would say is the way that we motivate transformational change is we need to maintain the ability to think outside of established policymaking frameworks. And I come at this from a very policy-focused lens, so bear with me on that. But we need to think outside the box. We need to be able to reflect on new paradigms of thinking, but also maintain a pragmatic connection to the paradigms that we're trying to influence. One of my main frustrations working particularly with youth engagement is that there's a lack of understanding about how some of these structures work. There's a lack of understanding about what a UNEA can deliver, UN Environmental Assembly can deliver, what a Conference of Parties is for, what a local authority engagement can look like, what the government can do. There's a lack of understanding. So enabling a better understanding of how to pragmatically speak into these systems, but also in a way that sort of, if anything, just presents a slightly different way of thinking about things, is something that I think is quite important. So, for example, a policy that is, even if it's a renewable energy policy, a policy that is based purely on efficiency and sort of growth can deliver small change, but I don't believe it can deliver transformative change, because what will happen is you'll just end up buying that into the systems that already exist. Equally, an entirely radical new approach to what a system could look like is also not going to lead to transformative change because it's going to be shut down by individuals who for whatever reason have a stake in the system that exists. And so I think finding a middle ground is really important. How you do that then is, and this is all on my experiences, so I'd be curious to engage in a bit more of a conversation as we move into Q&A. But my experience is that in order to enable those sorts of discussions to happen, we need to identify a new why, and that's the title of my presentation. And the reason I think we need to find a new why is because it enables a better discourse to happen. It enables a better conversation to happen. And I want to give two concrete examples from the work that I've been doing. And I want to first identify two gaps that I'm trying to fill. The one is a perceived or real exclusion from climate conversation. And in this, I'm talking specifically about climate narratives. And the inability to speak into some of these spaces and gain access to those spaces. On the narrative point, we often see in our work, what we've done at LSE is conduct field research in Egypt and Jordan and Indonesia, trying to engage faith communities in discussions. And what we found was that the language of climate change, the language of technical solutions, the language of 1.5, the language of Paris, the language of global adaptation mechanism, all these very technical terms mean nothing in those contexts. So if you ask them, are you concerned about climate change? They'll probably say, no, that's not our issue. That's something for the big Western corporations and governments to deal with. If you ask them, though, about the heat wave that they experienced last week, if you ask them about the flooding, then they will say, well, yes, of course we have to deal with that because that is fundamentally impacting our societies. So we need both. We need science to be, I was at an event during London Climate Action Week, and the main quote was, we need science to be our compass for COP30. And I sort of sat there, I was like, well, yes, but we also need to communicate that science in a way that resonates with the communities on the ground. And I think finding the way of bringing those discourses together is important. So one of the things that we did at the London School of Economics is we ran workshops in Egypt and Jordan initially. And what we did is we brought together local faith communities, recognizing that in those contexts, it's the faith leaders that have embedded trust and the most influence in those spaces. And we asked them, how do you talk theologically? What do you say in your sermon after a heat wave comes, after a flood comes? And from that discussion, it emerged these rich ways of making sense of the world around them. And I think that's a challenge is making sense of what we are dealing with. And it was that religious language that gave rise to those conversations and enabled them to be included in the climate conversation. On the youth level, another thing that we're trying to do is enable a convening. So one of the things that I've recently done is co-founded and I co-convened a youth forum for faith and ecology in London. Ash is part of it. Maria in the back is part of it. And it's what we've noticed. Well, you should ask them what they actually think. But the idea is we create a new space where we have young people who come together in London who are working in the sustainability sector to have a new discussion. Why are we doing the things that we're doing? And it is a faith-focused forum, which means that people bring their spiritual perspectives, but it's not limited to that. It's very much, we are taking action on the climate crisis because we believe it's the right thing to do, because we believe we have an accountability to God, because we have an accountability to others, because it's important to build a global family around this challenge. So just to conclude, I think, I hope that was a helpful framework and explanation of what I'm doing. I think one of the final reflections I have, though, in working with the UN and working on the local level is that there's a tendency, I feel, to be intimidated by an institution. There's a lot of talk about institutional challenges. There's a lot of talk about systemic challenges. Those exist, yes, but those institutions are made up of individuals. And I here, reflect on my own position within a large institution, that there are mechanisms for change. The institutions are made up of people and they are evolving organisms. And so I would leave this talk, and I'm like I said, I'd love to hear more reflections in the Q&A of just an encouragement that there is a lot of work happening, and there's a lot of work within institutions happening. And what we need to do is find a space and a time and a reason for gathering diverse perspectives into a room to have more robust conversations about what needs to be done and how we can all take action. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope I didn't take up too much time.
Thank you very much, Kristian. Personally, I calmed down a little bit because I see such wonderful young and bright people talking about all sorts of important questions, and most importantly, connecting all of them nicely. Youth, education, international cooperation, science, religion being there as well, creating spaces for interaction and collaboration. It's all fascinating. I hope with the next presentations, my hope in the bright future will strengthen further. Okay, so now we're back to Monica. I think the presentation was sorted, and yeah, the floor is yours, Monica.
So, quite the theme, right? Women in the environment. We know really that humanity is in a period of a lot of transformation, and this transition is all due to the triple planetary crisis that we're going through. Oh, we know that there are deep concerns, that we have ethical, moral concerns, and there are questions as well related to justice and equity that will determine the survival of not only ecosystems, but also of, it's okay. Of ecosystems and also of next generations, of cultures. So all of this is really dependent on these ethical and moral questions. If we start actually thinking about these questions and thinking about how do we build these frameworks? And I would like that we imagine what would be to have sustainability and women's leadership. Sorry, I think that maybe it's not good. Yeah. I will not focus on the presentation. I will just focus on what I will say. So really recognizing about climate justice, what it is, climate justice. Climate justice doesn't mean that everyone is going to have something and there will be a competition. Climate justice is much more than that. It's about really having a unified vision where we can find processes where together we can actually think of greater degrees of unity, and we can think of greater degrees of how the nations and humanity can be together. And also distinguishing the contributions of trust, of justice, and having another vision of what prosperity means. Because if we don't redefine prosperity, it becomes really very difficult for us to see where we're going with everything. And really demonstrating courage and moral leadership to articulate the vision of this healthy society that we're envisaging. So I invite you to explore these points. Actually, I didn't put my timer. I should have done that. So a few points related to the triple planetary crisis that we're going through. We see that these are three main interlinked issues that humanity currently faces. So not only climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss, these are all they have its own causes and effects, and each of us, we need to think of how we are going to find tools that will empower us to navigate through these issues with the material and spiritual balance that we have to really foster. Hit the next one. So as you see, actually you don't see that well. Yeah. There was a plant in front of the plant. So as you see, gender equality is not only a fundamental human right, but a necessary foundation for a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. There has been progress over the last decades, but the world is not on track to achieve gender equality by 2030. And this is from the UN Sustainable Development. So it really shows us that it is really the duty and responsibility, the moral and ethical responsibility of each one of us that are conscientious individuals men and boys, women and girls, communities and institutions to serve this cause of peace and unity. Because otherwise, if we're stewards, if we have the stewardship of this planet, if we are really looking after the whole ecosystem as not only human beings, but we're part of this ecosystem, so we want to look after it. But when we see what is happening, actually, next slide, please. When we see what is happening in the world in terms of the long-standing inequalities, we see that there are deep historical roots that remain, and they're all related to these long-standing inequalities, which makes women and girls really having different types of dimensions of difficulties with access to education, employment, political participation, legal rights. So we will see from the next slide that all of these points related to the deep historical roots, they bring an impact. So the next slide, please. So yeah, I don't think that they're in the same page, but yes, great. So in terms of estimation of time, so we have a timeline for changes at the current rate. So it's a very slow current rate, as we can see. So we're getting at a time where environmental degradation is one of the 10 threats officially cautioned by the UN's high-level panel on threats, challenges, and changes. And we see why women, and we see the trajectory that we have gone through and the impact that we're going to have in order to continue the race. And do we really need to have a race? So women really are amongst the first to experience the impact of ecosystem collapse. We're the first to, that especially where our livelihoods depend, we're the first ones to have the impact on land, water, biodiversity. With this background, we see how hard it is actually to continue to be prosperous in terms of being in the middle of this crisis, which are not in isolation, really. And we cannot really ignore that there are these injustices, there are these inequalities, and materialism and disunity has been part of this journey. So, and there is also this erosion of spiritual insights, which is not really helping women to advance. So the next slide, please. So we see that there are some root causes of the system failure. I don't want to focus too much on them, but when we think about, there's too much rigidity or too much inflexibility, or there are few components that dominate and exploit other components. So we want to see how we're going to evolve for a transformation that is going to help us to move forward. So the next slide, please. So I'm proposing the focus on 3 interconnecting themes, the systems thinking, and that would be, next slide. That would be thought leadership. So what does it mean? Does it mean that we're really thinking about all the expertise, the authenticity and genuine empathy that women have for the environment, the expertise, the insights, the experience that we share with our wisdom? So really like seeing from that angle, how important it is, the thought leadership that comes out of institutional mechanisms as well that are put together, or policies, and how women can actually act within the international, national, and local spaces, because there is a framework there, and that would be so much easier. And how important it is that women work shoulder to shoulder with men and boys. So next slide. The next one is the nexus between climate and peace, and the importance of it, because we know that with climate issues getting attention in peace processes, in building policy, in peace building policy, and in security sector reform, we know that it is extremely important that women at the moment of crisis, at the moment of the war, when the war happens, which we don't want to think about it, but 32 countries in the world are going through war at the moment. So at this moment, men are the ones that go to fight in the war, and women are the ones that stay behind. And they are the most vulnerable ones. They are the ones that they don't have shelter. They're the ones that have to look after their children, have to run away. So, and these are all the impacts that we're seeing. And then the last one, which is the gender dimensions to solve the triple planetary crisis. There's really like this interconnection between gender dimensions and solving the
Thank you.
planetary crisis. So women's responses are often marked by predictability, adaptability, resilience. But when we just think about it, we're just now in a context, we're in these last days in the conference, when we're talking about social action, we're talking about public discourse, we're talking about all the tools that it can give to us to think about how we're going to act in our own neighborhood, when we think about solutions of working in community gardens, bringing the community together, thinking about prioritizing families, communities, and the earth in this journey. And then the next. So the proposal for this theme, which is the theme of motivating transformational changes, is really to propose new definitions for this intersection. So how can we apply the principle of oneness of humankind? How can we think about the basic life standards for all women and girls for these and next generations to come? Do we want to see the same narrative that has been told for centuries and that we're still trying to do the catch up? Or how do we see justice in a local level? How can we reduce the suffering to every living organism for the well-being of the whole? And how can we find global initiatives that are relevant to the lives of the most vulnerable? Because it's about really thinking about the most vulnerable that we can progress and we can think about global prosperity. And then using nature-based solutions and science to define systems, transforming negative nature activities into positive ones. And thinking as well about the application of justice through collective prosperity and generosity, collaboration, and mutual assistance. And I close here with a big thank you for IEF and for all the panelists as well. And Secretary.
Thank you very much, Monica. You know, every time I hear about this particular topic, I think about the UN's idea of leaving no one behind. But I also would like to add that we should not just not leave anybody behind, but we should engage everyone to solve such an important problem that we're trying to address today. And considering that women are nearly 50% of the population, they can do a lot, right? Especially with all the innate qualities and vision and all the various capacities and skills women have. I think the solving of the issue of climate change will be one step closer. Okay, with that in mind, let's pass the microphone to our next speaker, whose name is Ash. He's a geography teacher and youth advocate. Ash fosters environmental awareness through grassroots education. Ash champions student empowerment via eco initiatives, promoting care, community action, and youth-led sustainability in education. So his presentation will be about changing the world versus worlds. That's a very interesting name. Let's see what's in there. I think briefly it is about transformative change through personal growth, using a youth to adult lens, emphasizing how individual worldviews shape broader environmental engagement and the power of young voices in change. I hope that's...
Thank you. I'm just gonna stand and see because no, don't worry. You. I'll look around you. Okay, mic check. 1 2 1 2. Can you guys hear me? Hello. Hello. This is it. So okay. All right, cool. So I've got like 2 cameras to look at. You guys, I can look this way. Okay, awesome, fantastic.
You can just hold that in front of you.
I'm probably not going to do that because that's going to distract me. I don't want to drop someone's expensive laptop. So I will give you some love and give everybody some love. So that's what we're going to do. First of all, huge privilege to be here today. Thank you, IEF, for having me. Really grateful for it. So my name is Ash. I am a geography teacher. And today I'm going to be looking into changing the world to changing the worlds. So who am I and why am I here, right? So could you go to the next slide, thank you? Thank you. So this is a beautiful permaculture, evidence of permaculture taking place. This is actually my fish pond in Bangladesh, my family fish pond in Bangladesh. And what you see on the side here is the fish in the center, of course, the water, that's where they live. And around the perimeter, you'll see bamboo branches with loads of vines going across. And that's actually Bangladeshi pumpkin. So what we actually have here is my uncle using permaculture and indigenous knowledge to present how we engage in the climate, engage in agriculture. So one thing for me is my heritage is Bangladeshi, my family are from there, but I was born in the UK. And one of the things that I really want to stress is that nature has always been a massive part of my life. And this is a lovely example of where I just sat there and just took that picture. I thought that sun looked really gorgeous. Can you go to the next picture, please? Thank you. So here we have some examples of what's taking place here. This is some more agriculture. So you've got the rice taking place, you've got the cows farming, just that inherent interaction taking place between everyone and the community, the land and people. But what's interesting about this is that's where my family are from. I'm not from there. I was born here. So even though we live in a globalized world, we hold multiple identities. And it's about understanding how our different world identities impact how we understand climate. Now, if you could go to the next picture, thank you. This is my village in 2022. I'm 22 years old. I'm currently 25. 22 years old. 3 years ago, this flood took place during the monsoon season, but it was extra intense. This was actually after the flood has calmed down. As you can see, everybody's walking around. The water was up to the pillars. Now, when you're a child or a person growing up in the UK, you think about, the Japan tsunami, you think about the Haiti earthquakes, and you're kind of like, it's happened. You move on. It's not until at the age of 22 that I witnessed that happen to my own family, that I experienced true empathy and understood the suffering of those people in other countries. I couldn't eat for 2 days, thinking to myself in my 22-year-old brain, if my family cannot eat, how can I eat? That's what went through my mind. But at the same time, I couldn't help but think how beautiful this scenario is. My cousins in the picture are going down, looking to help some people with my uncle, and you see the light shining on them. They're hopeful. This is one of my aunts and a little girl who's there. I actually don't know who it is specifically. I think it's one of the cousins. Anyways, what we have here is they're carrying on. They're doing their thing. Regardless of that, they're showing resilience. But we need to really understand that they're living their world and I'm living mine. I'm not going through what they're going through. After walking in that water, my cousin sent me pictures of his feet completely infected because, of course, after flooding takes place, you have sewage that goes up. So what is transformative change? How do we motivate transformative change? What does that mean? What does that look like? So could you go to the next slide? Thank you. So I'm 25. This was my writing 10 years ago. I'm 15 here. And I'm a really opinionated child as a 15-year-old. And it's really funny because I wrote here, so basically, I think, horrible English, by the way. My English teachers would hate me for that. This is an example of how, when I witnessed as a child, I wanted to change the world. When I saw a frustration, I saw an injustice, I felt quick to get hot, quick to speak out. Hands up for most of you. When you were younger and you saw an injustice, you felt like it had to be solved then and there. When you saw the problems of the world, you felt like you needed to solve it. So please, in the chat, please message, if you guys felt the same way. I can see quite a few of you felt that way. Now that I'm a teacher, 25-year-old teacher. I've been teaching for a year and a half now. And I reflect back on that 15-year-old. In that 10 years, you know, life happens. You know, you get jaded, you get worn down, you feel apathetic. You think, why am I even trying anymore? And that's okay, that's human. That's what it means to be human. It shows that you care. It shows that you care so much that you feel exhausted from caring. And that's wonderful. And this is why I'm really grateful for the people in this room, because this is an important opportunity to remind ourselves that when we come to these environments, it's to re-energize our batteries. Now, besides my horrible handwriting and, you know, my poor English, we're going to move on, right, to the next slide. Now, this is what I'm currently doing. I may not, this is the picture in the top, depending on which angle you're looking at, in the church. That is me with the Luton Council of Faiths. I thought to myself, how can I bring effective change? So I was engaging in some interfaith work in the Luton Council of Faiths. This picture in the bottom left corner is me doing a peace walk with the young people that I engage with the organization called The Feast. Here we have an eco iftar taking place at my cousin's house. Everybody looks miserable because they're really, really hungry right now. And they're not allowed to eat just yet. So we're all discussing. There are people from the Islamic faith, the Christian faith, Buddhist faith. Everybody's there, and we're all from Luton. You see, that's my hometown. We're all from Luton. We're discussing these topics of faith, conflict, climate, understanding differences, and emphasizing differences as well. Not to be coy about that. The last picture you have here is the feast, where I did a deep dive, exploring and helping young people to talk about the topics that they feel they're not allowed to talk about. Because one of my philosophies is, if we hide the topics that we're too shy to talk about, expect resentment and bitterness to fester. And I always say, bitterness is the sweet fruit for the devil, which he engages in. So, now that could you go to the next slide, thank you? Here it is, I'm at uni. This is me doing some tree planting, permaculture when I was at Brunel, doing my Global Challenges degree. I'm learning all these skills because when I was a young person, nobody taught me the skills to know how to organize, to know how to articulate myself, to know how to do a stakeholder analysis. So when I became a teacher, one of the parallels that I had was realizing, even though we become jaded, what you need to accept, that systemic change takes time. And systemic change is rooted in the relational power you have with other people, the relationships you have with other people. And actually links to what Kristian said as well. These institutions aren't necessarily scary, they're people themselves, they're made of individuals. It's about how you engage with those institutions as an individual and what intention you're coming there with. And my intention was always from a place of, let me understand the other side. Hence, we're here doing some youth work. The key story that I want to tell you right now is I teach children 11 to 18 years old. And I asked all of my students in the classroom, and in a classroom there's 30 kids roughly. I've taught at I trained at 3 different schools and I taught at 2. So roughly I've taught over 1,000 kids. I've come across over 1,000 children. But I specifically remember asking in 2 different schools to my students, I asked them, how do you guys feel about climate change? Classroom of 30, and I've asked this to multiple classrooms, at least 200 kids. 50% of them say, we're cooked, sir. We're absolutely cooked. Why am I even trying? Cooked meaning we're gone, we're dead, we're screwed. We're like, nothing, we can't solve anything. Then you had a 40% that believed, yeah, do you know what? Maybe we can bring some difference. Then you had this 10% that were like, unsure. They were a bit unsure. And what was interesting about the dynamic of the classroom is when I got them to debate, the students who were able to persuade the ones who were unsure were the ones who dominated the state of mind of that classroom, because they were able to get the last smaller votes onto their side. And some classrooms ended up with a negative perspective because I allowed the students to speak. Of course, as a teacher, I want to shift that. I'm not going to just let them leave the classroom with like apathy. You know, that's not my job, right, as an educator. But where at my previous school, at my last previous school, I came across this I was at all boys school, and it was really profound. It was a really actually profound and beautiful experience because I got to actually see the wide range of emotions young boys actually face, and it challenged a lot of my assumptions as well. So I came to my students, and one of them said to me, "Sir, I'm really worried about the future. I don't know what to do. Why am I even doing my GCSEs? What's the point? We're all gonna die, right? All cooked." I said, "Well, let's do something about that." I could tell in this young boy's eyes, looking into him and his 3 other friends, that those group of lads, even though they act all hard, right, in the lesson, throwing paper, taking the mick at each other, they were actually really scared. They were really anxious. And they didn't know what to do, and nobody was giving them the tools. So I thought, wow, God has placed me in a position where 10 years ago, I wanted to bring that change, and now I'm in a position to be able to bring that change to give them the tools that I worked so hard for. So I said to them, let's start a geography club, right? Let's explore it. What do you guys want to do? Oh, let's make a garden. Okay, let's explore it. So I taught these kids in this geography club the skills of communication, the skills of teamwork. And I thought, let me teach them at a university level. So I asked these lads, do you want to learn skills from university? They're like, why not, sir? I taught them stakeholder analysis. Now, teaching a bunch of 11-year-olds to 12-year-old stakeholder analysis is kind of difficult. So the way I explained it to them is like a football team. When you pick a team, you got to think about who you're going to choose and why you're choosing them. Another analysis I use is baking a cake. You've got to think about why you want each ingredient and what you want out of that ingredient. So I threw the next question to them. Who's got the power? Who are the people in your school right now, who can bring change? And they started thinking about it. Oh, the head teacher. Oh, this person. Oh, that person. The head of department. Oh, the site manager. They started listing and naming all these individuals who have the ability to bring that change. And I said to them, okay, cool, now you know that. Put yourself in their shoes. Why would they want to listen to you? Right? Because I said to these kids, I want to teach you guys how to be tough, intellectually. I want to challenge you. From here, they made a beautiful presentation. I got these 17 and 18-year-old boys come down and teach these 11 to 12-year-old young lads how to engage in project management. So the 17, 18-year-olds taught them how to do project management. The 11 to 12-year-olds were doing the presentation. It was all beautiful. Do you know what makes this even more amazing? We think we need to spend so much time doing a lot. We don't. There's only 45 minutes twice a week. And that profoundly impacted their state of mind. Now, I had to sadly, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So I actually had to sadly leave the school for personal reasons. And there was a young lad that came to me. And it was at the end of the term, Easter term, and everybody was coming. I had like 45 kids in my classroom, like roughly 45, 50 kids that were just coming in and out saying goodbye to me. And I felt truly moved. I didn't realize how powerful I had an impact on them. And one boy that I really got along with, and he'd come and stay after class, after school every day, just to have a chit chat with me. He gave me this letter right at the end, folded it up. So imagine this, everybody's gone off, and this one last boy walked up to me, kind of like sliding his shoes, dragging his feet. He said, "Sir," he looked me in the eye, smiled, said, "Sir, can you read this at home?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And I'm not thinking anything of it, because I'm giving my equipment away, I'm making sure I'm giving all the important items back to the school. I drive off to my friend's house and I'm waiting outside, sitting in the car with my engine on. I know, not really good for the environment, right? So I opened this piece of paper that was folded 4 times and I read it. "Dear Mr. Ahmed, thank you for being the best teacher I ever had. We had fun times like clubs and after school. I hope you do well in life and I wish you a happy Easter. I will not back down. I will make sure the sustainable garden goes through. If you want, see the pictures, please message." I blanked that out, right? "And thank you for making me not commit suicide." Now, I actually had to really have a big think about whether I want to share that with you or not. So I thought, do I want to leave you guys feeling negative? The suicide bit isn't the negative part. What I really found crazy about this transformational change is the fact that this boy, number one, I didn't even know the signs. Not until I looked back and I read that, I saw the signs. And it goes to show we don't really realize how serious the mental health issue regarding climate anxiety is for our young people. And we don't realize that. And I say that because in the UK, we have this trope amongst educators. And it's subtle, it's unspoken. Those who cannot do, teach. And it's such a poisonous state of philosophy that we have teachers, and not all teachers, there are some great teachers out there, that there are certain teachers who teach in misery. And that is poisonous to the spirit of our youth who are looking for hope. And to those educators, I say, leave the industry and come back, recharged and freshened up, and reignite your heart and passion into teaching. If I ever lose my passion, I will leave. I will never stand in front of a classroom if I've lost the will to teach. Never. Because that taught me that these young boys, when you come together, there's three things that I want everybody to take away from it. Number one, when you work with young people, don't be tokenistic. Don't just do it for the funding. I need a bunch of young people, tick box exercise. Number two, be honest. Young people, tell them, look, X, Y, Z factors, we can't do this. This is the outcome, but these are your barriers. Be honest with them. Do not underestimate the creativity that young people can have when given limitation. And number three is just fundamentally be authentic. Be real with them. Don't promise them the world. Because not everybody can be a Greta Thunberg. There's a beauty in bringing change just one-to-one that isn't witnessed, because it's carried on in the ripple effect. This, when we overemphasize, oh, you guys are going to change the world, this and that, it creates more anxiety. When you reinforce the fact, hey, you may not change the world with this project, but that's okay. But what you will do is have impact on those you love and those you care about locally. And this is the most important thing that they need to leave. Because when you are of age, you will potentially be in a position to be more effective because you're older and you're wiser. Motivating transformational change. Those kids, those boys gave me all those fidget toys, right? For ADHD, they all gave me those toys and I thought, wow, that's a lot of toys. And they remind me of how much change, how much I've impacted them. Motivating transformational change is in this letter. Not because of the ideation of suicide, but because that boy felt empowered and saw that he and his friends are capable of bringing the change they wish to see in the world. And he was given those tools. Let's not waste time discussing action, but rather giving the tools for those who wish to take action now. And those young people that you come across are in that state of mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ash, for such a powerful story, presentation, or whatever you call it. We were all amazed, and I even had a drop of what do you call it, a tear. No, it was amazing. And I actually want to learn from you how to be a better teacher at uni with the older kids. All right. So on this note, I will pass the microphone to Victoria Thoresen. She's an international education leader, a protagonist. Victoria has worked with UNESCO and UNEP on sustainable lifestyles. She founded a collaborative learning center and promotes global change through research, policy, and teaching. And her presentation will be about aiming at well-being for all. Victoria discusses the gap between the Sustainable Development Goals and real progress, stressing education, collaboration, and long-term thinking to achieve peace, equity, and global well-being. I hope that's accurate.
Is it okay if I sit, or would it be better if I stood? Maybe it's better to stand, okay? Can you hear me? I've talked myself almost without a voice this afternoon. It's hard to be the last one in a panel. One wants to connect to everything that's been said beforehand, especially you, because as a passionate teacher, there is nothing more rewarding than seeing young people be empowered, and also nothing more frustrating than seeing young people give up. But what you said earlier about the transformative change is rooted in individual change and the relationship to institutions. What I want to talk about very briefly is about our relationship to a very big set of individuals who constitute an institution, and that is the international community that stands behind the delegates who then made at the United Nations the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 21. So I'm trying to make you think that, don't just think of what I'm talking about as being something distant and far away. We're talking about a blueprint, as I said this afternoon, a plan that has been created by people all around the world to help us move forward and see how we can deal with all these different issues. You can move to the next slide. Constructive change, if we take the advice, among other things, of the Bahá'í writings, of the writings of all the different religions, is basically when institutions and individuals, or systems, I would say, and individuals have developed the ability to both envision, to learn, to reflect, and to cooperate. And the international community envisioned a future of peace and well-being for all when they created Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, and then tried to reinforce it with the Pact for the Future last year. And the interesting thing is that these Sustainable Development Goals are great first collective steps, but I think everyone will agree that they have their lacks and they have their strengths. And part of what I want us to think about is, what can we learn from the Sustainable Development Goals, the progress and the lack of progress that's happened? And can we, in here thinking about that, see anything that helps us motivate this transformational change we're talking about? These are the Sustainable Development Goals. They were, you can move to the next slide because I think we've played with that enough. The Sustainable Development Goals, this is an overview from this last year of how far we've gotten and haven't gotten. The point is that they were based on the fundamental values of humanism and economics. And because of that, if you read the basic The Future We Want, the document, the preamble, I've mentioned that about 10 times, so that's your homework. Go home and read the preamble of Agenda 2030. It acknowledges the potential of humanity to achieve nobility. But they say that it's based on the kind of what I would call perhaps a misapprehension or assumption that to achieve that kind of nobility is based more or less entirely on material development, rather than on spiritual and material development, which is what we need, both of them. And, as I said earlier this afternoon, that is also reinforced by the fact that to achieve, to understand if we have gotten to where the goals have requested us to go, we have very concrete and measurable goals, targets, and indicators. And that's great. It can help us move from one baseline to another. We see, what we did 10 years ago, what we did today, how we've gotten. But unfortunately, they do not reflect growth in the more spiritual aspects. They do not in any, oops, you've gone backwards. We need to go forwards. Not so far. One more back. they don't reflect the qualities which are necessary to achieve many of these goals. And we've all talked about these things here during the conference. I think there are, I could list a whole lot of reports and research that also agree that it's trust and honesty, respect and compassion that are examples of the kinds of qualities that need to be developed in order to achieve, to move those green lines further over. And those are not there, and it causes a problem. So we need to think about that in a way. Now we can go to the next one. Because in addition to the fundamental values, you have a problem that many of the goals don't give very clear value-based definitions of what we're trying to achieve. I mean, we have a lot of goals which are reduce poverty, not what is prosperity, as was mentioned. We have goals that say eradicate this or change that or get rid of climate change, but we need to look closer at what we're talking about. And an example is quality education. And as I referred to slightly this afternoon, the idea of what is quality education? There is no definition in the goal 4 of what quality education is. What they have is numbers of schools, numbers of students, how many, and the trouble is, we have lots more students in school, we have lots more schools. But in large portions of the world, we have what we now call literacy poverty. That means kids who come out of school or are 10 years old and cannot read and write. How are they going to do all the wonderful things you all have been talking about? How are you going to engage them in a conversation when they haven't actually learned how to learn? And this is one of the challenges, because, that shows, again, a weakness that we need to address. And of course, the more abstract aspects of this concept of quality education, where you learn to go from the ecocentric to the magnanimous, or from materialism to valuing what counts, is not something that is explicit there. It's not a part of the goals and the targets. We'll go to the next one. We talked a lot this afternoon about trade-offs in our game, and I'm not going to review so much of that. You recall the conflict between the consumer and the capitalist.
Yes, yes.
But this is one of the conflicts in the Sustainable Development Goals and in dealing with all our problems, that you have one issue that often requires a trade-off with the other issue, whether it's deforestation and the growth of economy in a country or whatever. And I think that the key here is, as we said this afternoon, increasing the realization that there has to be more collaboration between the players, the people who are involved in working on the various issues. The consumers and the producers have to sit down and work more together. The people who deal with forestry and industry have to work more together. And then we need the arenas for that. And we need to know how to do it, how to communicate. And that's where we get back to what you all were saying. Next one, please. I'm kind of moving fast but I've mentioned some things which perhaps reflect weaknesses in the Sustainable Development Goals as they are progressing now. But there are also some very positive things. And one thing, as I often like to mention, that all of you could have contributed with input to the Sustainable Development Goals. It was open to everyone in the world. You maybe didn't know this, did you? That you could send in and write in and say, but you were maybe too young. But it was open to everyone. They didn't do a very good job of advertising it. It was before everyone was online and all that. But it opened the idea of universal participation. The fact that major groups, NGOs, things like that, can participate more actively in these processes is a support, a kind of a way to show that universal participation is a concept, an idea, a practice that is being accepted more and more in the world. And that's basic. We know that from the Baha'i faith. We sit around in our study groups with people from all backgrounds, all religions, all places, and we work together. These are just some of the friends that I had in the network. I think, Arthur, you were there maybe or something. Anyway, it's an important part of the positive thing that these Sustainable Development Goals have been helping develop. If we go on a little bit to the next slide, I find this is interesting because you were talking about helping kids understand how to organize, how to how can you influence. And I was telling someone at dinner, I'm an old person. I was involved in the revolution in '68, right? We took over the universities and we closed, we did all this stuff. And the idea was to be able to do these things that we thought were going to create change, we had to learn about the systems. We had to learn who has the power, how can you influence. And when I moved to Norway, I learned very quickly that the distance between me as a little person on the street and the top of the hierarchy was not that far. I mean, I could take the telephone and talk to the prime minister. I could go in and knock on the door to my member of parliament. You can't maybe do that everywhere, but there are channels, more and more channels, and we need to learn about them. But what we haven't learned, and what in a way blocks the development of these goals to a great extent, is none of the goals include how do we develop humility and generosity. And without that, we have these ecocentric, short-term priorities that hinder the progress of the world. If we go to the next one, as I'm trying to quickly go through, this is one that I find interesting because I was fortunate enough to join some of you here in the 10 years that were a part of creating the Sustainable Development Goals, during the commissions on sustainable development and the many other activities, the different COPs and all. And when you see how the world community, the global community, is trying to sit down at the table and consult, one realizes a number of things. The way the consultation and negotiation goes is very deficient. It is very dominated by political and commercial interests, and it has a lot that needs to be improved. Okay, Abdul Baha talks about the art of consultation, and all of you have mentioned the importance of developing how we talk to each other. And I must say that it's very exciting to see how much consultation takes place even now every year at the UN, in these agencies, in civil society organizations, in schools, rather than people standing up shooting or stealing or, I mean, we've got that too, but the art of consultation is something which is a prerequisite for transformative change, and we need to develop that. Next one. Any of you ever run on a treadmill? Of course.
Yes.
I see the Sustainable Development Goals, the Pact for the Future, and many of the other international agreements as a kind of treadmill. They let us exercise in many ways. We are able to take up and focus constructively on issues which may seem overwhelming, but at least we have an opportunity to focus on them and not let fear and mistrust make us passive or make us give up, as we were talking about. But the trick here is, if it's just a treadmill, you keep going more or less in the same place, right? You don't get too fast if you're far on the treadmill. And what I see as the key here is, if we are aware of what are the lacks or the things which the Sustainable Development Goals have ignored or overlooked or not included, such as developing spiritual qualities, such as creating goals which focus on service and generosity, and learning how to better consult with people of all backgrounds, all economic classes and all, then I feel this will be an exercise which will help us hop off and move to this, which in the Norwegian painting is Soria Moria, our goal. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. A wonderful panel. I think Victoria nicely connected all our different topics together. So now I see a bright future in front of us. But at the same time, I looked up this quote saying, "The more I know, the less I understand." So, you know, it's such a complex question, and the answers must be complex too. But the ability of, you know, coming together, discussing things like this, having a genuine consultation, considering all the spiritual qualities we need to make these sustainable development goals work, having people of different backgrounds, genders, everyone at the same table, again, will hopefully bring us to the bright future. So in the interest of time, I know I promised 45 minutes or 1 hour, it's much more than that. Maybe we'll keep our Q&A a bit shorter. So while you're thinking, maybe I'll fire away the first one, which I came up with in consultation with one of my friends. What do you think, what kind of environment do you think should be created for individuals, communities, or institutions to make a transform, I mean, to come up with solutions and to motivate them to act? So the question is generic. Anyone who wants to answer can answer. Yeah, what kind of enabling environment, what kind of environment needs to be created to involve young people or communities or adults, anybody in climate action, and what should be done? What kind of environment should be created for it?
Yeah, so if I were to talk of that as a high school teacher, should I come closer? Okay, cool. Awesome. What kind of environment do we want to create in order to have action to take place? I think that's a multifaceted question. I think for me personally, what I witnessed in my variety of high school classrooms is that it's the bond. It's the friendship that's created that leads people to want to bring change. It's like, you know what? I've had kids who don't like geography come into my geography club just because their friends are there, right? And that's really important to recognize. It doesn't really matter if they like geography or not. And I think adults are quite similar. You kind of go to an event because your friend's there or your friend has asked you to come, so you go. And if you don't want to go, if you're not feeling it, you just won't go. And I think that's quite a parallel. So how can we encourage more people to bring that change, right? Number one, I think it comes down to really making sure we tell people what are we expecting from each other. And the idea of this, I personally don't, there's this quote like the individual. I'm not gonna lie to you, I don't believe in the concept of the individual. I think I really love the idea of, I studied modern African history as a module, and there's this concept called Ubuntu from the Bantu tribe in West Africa. I am because we are. And I think even when you study like modern psychology, it really goes into how like your sense of identity is a collection of all your experiences. And we forget that even all of us sitting here, we've all had childhood friends who we probably still speak to today that have contributed to us as an individual. Because when I think about the idea of individual, it comes into like me. And when we have this me mentality and not this how do you say it? Magnanimous mentality, we won't ever shift into that. So I really like to say community leadership. How can we foster this environment of change? Let's stop saying individual, let's start saying community leadership. Who's all coming together to make this wonderful melting pot of a soup that we're going to enjoy today, you know? So I would argue, yes, you are an individual, but you're not as unique as you really think you are, because we create each other. And the last thing I'm going to say is learn how to communicate with each other and like create a good vibe, make it fun, make it enjoyable.
Thank you very much.
Do you have in England citizen assemblies? This is a big movement around the world. Where citizen assemblies, but do you have young people involved in that as well? I mean, the idea behind citizen assemblies is that you bring all kinds of people together from, because that's one way of forming arenas.
We can't do that in this country.
You can.
You can. There's like a change. I don't disagree with you, Victoria, at all. The barriers to entry to doing citizen assemblies for young people is quite hard, because it's hard to get schools to accept students to be taken out of lesson. Because the kids, depending on, let's say if they're from a deprived community and their reading age is below 15, and they're like 15 years old, but their reading age is like 10, for example, that kid's not going to be given permission to leave because they're focused on trying to get their grade up. So we also need to see that. There are definitely set assemblies that take place, but I guess the question then becomes, how can we as a community figure out how we can encourage schools to agree to this more?
Sorry. Thank you very much. I think we also have Kristian and Monica want to say something.
Yeah, just very briefly, I think it's important to recognize that there's a lot of deep-seated mistrust in a lot of these conversations, particularly with youth communities and faith communities. So inviting them into a government space may not be the best way of doing it because they have existing relationships with that entity that could be counterproductive. So creating a different space where you make it very clear that the purpose is to listen and understand where they're coming from is very important. So I often, but have a variety of stakeholders there. So have less, I sometimes say, less discussions about how to include youth and less youth-led movements about how to include youth, and more spaces where we can actually bring together both of those sectors together in perhaps a third space to discuss how to do that productively.
And also to think about spaces where we can agree with in a principle level of what oneness of humanity looks like, what justice looks like, what does equality between men and women looks like. Because if we don't actually create, if we don't envisage a conceptual framework that we can discuss together in a local level, in neighborhoods, with our neighbors, with our friends, with our co-workers, in the national level, in the international level, we don't have a parameter to base our framework of action, because otherwise it becomes just like the treadmill. We're just in the conceptual framework, and we don't want to be only in the conceptual framework. We want to move to the framework of action. And then how that looks like, it needs to have universal participation. That's a fair participation. That everyone is not just about having the voice or having a tick in the box. It's that we're there, we're humble, we have a posture of learning, we have we become detached of our own ideas. There's no superiority. There's not because this person is wealthy, then they're 5 points more than this person that doesn't have anything, or countries. So really the main learning that we have been having in the last months now, since March 19th, we received a very powerful letter from the Universal House of Justice, which is administration of the Bahá'í faith, and it brings that the family unit is as a mini nation. So if we really have these discussions in our homes, within our parents, our children, if we know how to communicate, it's really about communication, because these bonds of friendship, they are formed, but it's really about how we respect, how we interact within each other.
Thank you very much. So we'll take a question from the audience.
No, I have an observation.
Okay, let's go
My
ahead.
observation is that, when you're talking about
It's okay, you can stand there. They will hear you.
we've hit the nail on the head when we're talking about relationships, and especially when we're dealing with children in the classroom. I've been a teacher for over 35 years as well, but I left school at 16 with no qualifications originally, right? I had to find my way there. And when I found my way there, I had the choice of working in a prestigious school or a school where kids leave early. And I thought, if I go to the school where the kids leave early, I'll be able to deal with that situation better, because I had to cope with that situation myself when I was their age. So I think teachers need to connect with pupils on that level. And when you teach your subject, you've got to teach with passion, right? And with humor, right? And you've got to get them on your side. But whose side are they on, right? We're all on the same side. Now, when you go to the UN and you go to places like New York and you see the United Nations Security Council. When you see it from a distance, it seems very powerful and very wonderful and everything. When you're in the chamber itself, it looks very small, very intimate, and say, well, how is it they can't really make any decisions there without getting upset with one another and pulling out the veto? 5 nuclear states who want to maintain the status quo, the possibility of 10 other states coming in temporarily to work alongside them, but ignoring the fact that we have today where the largest population is not in Europe, it's not in America, it's in India. China comes second, and then you have large states like Indonesia, Malaysia, and whatever. How are they represented in this system, right? So in the same way the kids in the classroom were relating to their education, we as citizens of the world are relating broken up system which has no real democracy attached. Not a question. Very much. Change is what we need, and it's a system we change as soon as possible.
So I'm gonna give a chance for another question from the audience. We see a young person there. Representing you. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I guess I'll stand. First, I just want to thank all the panelists. I think it was a really great collection of people from very different backgrounds where a lot of things can come together. Quite a few of you touched on this idea of inclusion. And I wanted to bring this up because we were talking about the idea of no one left behind. I know, Kristian, you briefly touched on inclusion. And I was also thinking during when you shared that note from your student that, you know, part of what makes you feel safe and feel seen is this idea of being part of something and being included. And I was speaking to someone last week regarding London climate action. And she was saying, she's from Afghanistan, and she was saying, you know, there's not a lot of inclusion because, for example, people get denied visas from the countries where they need to be here the most, where they need to contribute to the conversation, or they don't speak English fluently, so they're maybe not taken seriously or given the platform. And we have, I think, people on this panel who work in very local context, on a national and an international context. And I'm just wondering what you've seen as effective ways to include people in this discourse to make them not just feel included, but really genuinely included. And what, you know, we might be able to learn from that.
It's quite an important question. Does anybody has anything to say on this? No.
I mean, I can briefly touch on that. So one statistic that I have, and I don't know the actual statistic, but the vast majority of climate communications and climate articles are published in English, and that's the problem. So I actually haven't been involved with this, but there's a wonderful organization called Climate Cardinals, which is actually run with the intention of translating that information to youth around the world. So that's a really great way of just making it accessible, and that can be a linguistic thing. It can just be making sure that the spaces that you have really speak to the needs that are present on the ground. I think from my experience chairing a UN council, is it's very difficult to create that space because there's often a very specific agenda. And I don't mean, you know, political agenda, but just, you know, these are the things we have to get through. These are the announcements. What I've done more or less, hopefully successfully, is just add another 30 to that and start inviting members of the council to share their own experiences and invite a conversation among the members of the council. And I've received a lot of positive feedback for working with the team to do that. So I think even just allowing space to listen, really.
Great. Anybody else? Final thoughts before we pursue our bedtime? Okay, cool.
I'm so sorry, yeah. Could you repeat like the question one more time?
Yeah, I guess basically ways that you have been able to carry out some level of inclusion in your own context. So you can, you know, learn from that.
Oh, okay, cool. So yeah, that's a nice question. I really appreciate you asking that. Inclusion, making sure everybody's voices feels heard. Feels heard. Anyways, yeah, making sure that people's voices are heard, That's really important. So in my classroom, I think one thing I like to do in my geography club, especially when I was at my all-boys school before I moved to mixed school, even in the mixed school, I asked them to practice, I guess in a weird way, systems thinking. So put yourself in someone else's shoes. And I force them, I get them to not force them, but I get them to act out like what they think someone else would do. So one of the biggest things that I do is I say to my classroom, okay, let's split up 30 kids, 15 of them are ministers and the other 15 are being controlled, right? Governed. And I say to them, okay, what do you all need on a day-to-day basis? And think about everything. So when it comes down to inclusion, I think for someone to feel included, they also need to feel understood. And it's important to model that in the classroom. So I ask a lot of my male students, think about it from a girl's perspective, how they would feel, and so on and so forth. And that kind of makes them think, oh, I never thought about it like that. And until we encourage people to practice that and model that, it's up to us to model that as well. I also, in my classroom, model this. What does healthy disagreement look like? It goes back to the main point Victoria is making around what is good consultation. And currently, I would frankly say, we do not have adults in power who model what healthy disagreement looks like. And honestly, it's really embarrassing to tell when my students come up to me and say, sir, we've able to have a healthy disagreement here in the classroom. Why can't they have that as well? And it makes you think, it makes you really question like the nature of what's going on. But thank you so much for your question. I don't want to take up too much time. I know we have a few things to get done, so
I'd just like to throw a little bomb into the discussion here. I find that, to be able to have a inclusion, the people need to know where they can go to participate. And they also have to have some kind of knowledge, right? And the trouble today that I find is that many people are directed by the algorithms. I mean, what they know, what information they. And so when I go out and I meet people, whether they're students or they're adults or whatever, and I talk about these things and we discuss the possibility of coming together and contributing, they say, yeah, but I don't know enough. I don't get the information. How on earth can I discuss climate change? I can't find any info. And I say, yeah, but what is it that you do find? Oh, I find this and this and this because I'm interested in that. And I bought that once. So I get, and if we realize and we help young people and other people understand how much the information we get is by the internet, by the AI, by these other things, and say, okay, you have to make an effort to look for the link where you can go to be included. Then it's going to be, because there are lots of places out there that can include and bring people in to discuss and to share. But a lot of people just can't find it because they're being steered into other directions.
Thank you very much. I think we're gradually entering another topic of AI and all these technologies that create wonderful spaces for us, but also could be misused and divert us from the truth. Okay, dear friends, especially the ones online, I couldn't get your questions because we are running out of time. It's about bedtime in the UK if you're in other parts of the world. Audience, I think, had a couple of hands up, but I hope we can continue this conversation further in the corridors. And on this note, I would like to thank our panel. Maybe we'll give them a round of applause. Thank you very much, everyone. And I hope you have a good continuation of the conference. And see you later and good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.